Welcome to Flipping the Table. Today, Michael engages two voices from California's dairy industry, nutrition expert Amy DeLisio and dairyman Cody Nicholson Stratton. They discuss what dairy farmers want the public to think about its products and producers. Both have been challenged in recent years. Some critics cite dairy's environmental impacts, and others challenge its nutritional value. The industry has been proactive in the face of these challenges. Rather like rice and other large commodity groups, dairy has been researching, innovating, organizing, and advocating to make its case in a highly polarized and culturally diverse world. Enjoy the show.
Hello, this is Michael. When I was in grammar school many decades ago, every day that I went to school without a lunch pail containing a glass-lined thermos, I had to make sure I had a nickel in my pocket. I would walk to the cafeteria where the lunch ladies were cooking our meal from scratch. There, I would buy a half pint of milk in a wax cardboard carton using that nickel. Well, things have changed a bit since then. Milk is more than a nickel, and now some places it's become a political issue, like meat. Yet dairy remains a powerhouse food across the globe, particularly in America, and most especially in California, where it remains the #1 agricultural product coming out of our state. According to the USDA in 2023, dairy farmers in California generated $8.1 billion worth of milk. This is milk's value at the farm gate before it is turned into cheese, yogurt, ice cream, and all the other dairy products. I would bet only a small number of Californians know this fact. Most would probably guess that fruits, vegetables, or wine top the list of California products. But milk has remained #1 despite a host of environmental, economic, and marketing challenges. Environmentalists attack dairy over its water pollution and climate impacts. Animal rights groups like PETA don't like how many farmers confine their animals or perpetuate lactation. And public health and nutrition experts have challenged dairy's impact on children and adults that exhibit lactose intolerance or are overweight. So battles rage over inclusion of whole milk and some other dairy products in school meals. The whole thing has become a polarized issue. Yet despite the critics and discord, according to a December 2020 report by the National Institutes of Health, 80% of children aged 2 to 8 years old, 57% of children aged 9 to 18 years old, 42% of adults aged 19 to 70, and then 60% of adults aged 71 plus all drink milk. They're consumers of it. And the per capita U.S. consumption of milk products in 2023 was 600 pounds. So it appears to me that milk, like meat, must be seen as a staple in the American diet. This is why dairy farmers remain proactive in the face of all the critics. And today we're going to hear from two vibrant voices from the California dairy community who share their thoughts on the opportunities and the challenges today and into the future. So my guests include Amy DeLisio, who is the CEO of the Dairy Council of California. Amy and I were colleagues at the Public Health Institute, where for many successful years, she was the program director for the Center for Wellness and Nutrition, which is a close collaborator of Roots of Change. She is joined by dairyman Cody Nicholson Stratton from Humboldt County on the north coast of California. He and his husband Thomas operate Foggy Bottom Boys Organic Dairy and Diversified Farm that has been operating on that land for 6 generations. And I had a chance to visit Cody and Thomas's dynamic operation back in 2022 when Rock and UC Davis kicked off our regenerative meat work in the North State. I know you will find our conversation informative and interesting, so let's begin. Amy and Cody, welcome. Great to be with you today via Zoom to talk about dairy. How you doing?
Great. Thanks for having us, Michael.
I'm doing awesome. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. So we're going to jump right in to talk about dairy in California. It's a huge product of this state, and it's got lots of opportunities and lots of challenges. And so we're going to spend our time today exploring those. And Amy, who is a former colleague of mine from the Public Health Institute, with whom I worked for many years on cool stuff, is going to kind of begin by telling us some of your background in public health, your job at Dairy Council of California, and what you do.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. So originally I grew up in a working class community in Ohio, and that really started me to see some of those health disparities, health and wealth disparities, you would say, which kind of led me down the path of prevention and public health. I am a registered dietitian nutritionist by training, but really have primarily worked professionally only in the public health world, but really looking at nutrition and the impacts on health. So I've worked with government and nonprofit institutions, a lot of nutrition safety net programs, and this really has allowed me to see, the value of nutrition and how it can prevent disease and contribute to overall health, as well as, barriers people face every day putting healthy food on their tables. So when I got this opportunity to work over at the Dairy Council of California, it really gives me this opportunity to work both at the nexus of nutrition and agriculture, as well as public health. So I really think nutrition can be an equalizer in equity. It can really have a key factor of health equity. Having enough food to eat, having the right type of food to eat can really support overall growth, development, and health. And dairy is one of those powerhouse foods that really provide that nutrition and can be very complementary to the fruits and vegetables we also grow here in California. So I think here at the Dairy Council, we offer a lot of free nutrition education. We provide dairy ag literacy through our mobile dairy classroom, as well as on-site farm tours to really have the public have a better understanding where dairy comes from and how it goes from farm to table in about 2 days. And we really focus on elevating the health of children and communities through a lot of diverse partnerships across the state, right? We can't do this work alone. And right now, we really can't talk about, nutrition without also talking about healthy food systems. So I think dairy being the largest agricultural product in California, really leading the world in sustainable practices is really an opportunity for us to also integrate some of those messaging into our work here at Dairy Council of California. And we just really believe, or I believe everyone has a right to access to healthy and nutrition foods. And dairy really fits into a lot of healthy eating patterns.
Great, thank you. So Cody, I've been up to your farm, Foggy Bottom Boys, awesome place. You're 6th generation dairy farmers. Tell us about yourself.
Yeah, so I am a 6th generation dairy farmer. Like you said, my family began farming in Humboldt County in the 1860s when they immigrated from Denmark, and we still farm that same piece of original land. We milk about 100 cows. We're a diversified operation, however, so not just dairy cattle, but beef, lamb, niche meat fiber, as well as pastured laying hens. And, as we grew and we're really looking for ways to be sustainable, not just from an environmental standpoint, but also from an economic standpoint as a small family farm, we found that one area we could expand into was agritourism and working as a farm that's not just a farm, but a demonstration farm. So sharing agriculture, sharing the actual dairy on-farm process with school-age children as well as adults, giving tours. And that's grown into our own ice cream brand and small processing facility that we give tours of. And something that as a family we're really passionate about is access to nutrition and food security. So we do a lot of work within our local communities here, just helping to provide nutrition and access to locally produced foods, both on the school level, within a couple of our indigenous governments locally, and communities that are experiencing natural disasters over the past few years. And so that's been an area that for us has been really important, is just making sure that as a farm, we're not just sending it out into the world, but we're also helping to build strong, resilient local communities and helping to revitalize communities that maybe have dwindled over the past few decades and bring growth and new life and new blood back into them.
That's great. So you have a tour going on there today, right?
Yeah, so we might actually hear, I'm in the room next door to the processing area, so we might hear some very excited first graders that are learning about dairy and ice cream. A couple minutes ago, there was some shouting about milking shorthorns. So they were very excited to learn about breeds of dairy cattle besides Holsteins and Jerseys.
That's great. So let's jump into the deeper possibilities and challenges that dairy faces in the modern world. And let's begin with this idea of sustainable nutrition, which is a concept that you, Amy, and the Dairy Council have been advancing over the last couple of years. So how do you define it, and how does dairy fit into this?
Yeah, so sustainable nutrition kind of goes beyond just looking at the environmental impacts, but really emphasizing overall healthy people, healthy animals, and a healthy planet. So it's kind of ensuring wholesome, nutrient-dense foods are accessible, affordable, and culturally relevant, while also preserving environmental resources and supporting local communities. So we really feel dairy fits into this. One, it does have a large economic impact here in California. And we want to look at ways to support both small and large farm operations, right, to keep that nutrition security and make sure folks have enough to eat. We also want to continue to see these ongoing innovative practices happening on farm that help to advance that environmental side. But we really see, there's a lot of aspects of nutrition components. It has 13 essential nutrients that we see in milk and dairy foods. And there also are a lot of positive health claims that come out of it. So we all pretty much know the improved bone health. That's been a long-going message, but the ongoing research into the benefits of dairy on people, include blood pressure reductions in cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes, improved digestive health. There's a lot of research showing the strong benefits of fermented dairy, like yogurt and other things on the gut. Also, it supports brain health and, can help support children have the best start in life. So we also feel like it's easily accessible. You can find it usually at most grocery stores, even in food deserts, and it's provided to children through programs like the school meals program. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to really look at the ways that dairy fits into different cultures, as well as the health benefits that really help to cement it as a sustainable nutrition component of overall diets and health.
So you've just laid out all these positive nutrition benefits from dairy products, a variety of dairy products, right? Mm-hmm. So what do you say to the folks that are critical, who are saying it's actually not that healthy and that our kids shouldn't be having it in their early years? What are your responses to that?
Yeah, I think, there's not really other alternatives. There's not really another product that matches that nutrition profile. It has a strong balance of macronutrients like carbohydrates, fats, and protein, but it also has a lot of these other nutrients like calcium, vitamin D, choline, iodine, and other things you only get from animal source foods.
So are you saying that, for instance, all this move to oat milk and almond milk, which seems to be a kind of a trend or a fad right now, is that not getting the same things from that?
They're not getting the same level of nutrition from that. Many of those products can supplement and add some of those nutrients, but we're not sure if the same level of absorption is happening when they do that, right? Dairy has this dairy matrix, which is part of the, nutrient and non-nutrient components. And when we see research and studying of it, it really has a really positive impact on health. So yeah, I think those alternatives do not have the same benefits as milk. They're just not matched in the full nutrition profile. And then also, I know lactose intolerance comes up a lot when we talk about milk and dairy, but there are a lot of ways that people with lactose intolerance can still enjoy dairy. It could be maybe cutting down drinking smaller amounts of milk or consuming milk with your meals, or maybe opting for lactose-free varieties of milk, but also choosing a lot of natural cheeses or even fermented foods like yogurt or kefir actually tends to have less problems. They're lower in lactose and more easily digested. So it's really ways that people can look at personal ways that they can still include dairy in their diet, even if they experience lactose intolerance.
So that kind of gets potentially to this idea of culturally appropriate foods. That's a very important, in a world where we're seeking health equity, that becomes extremely important, that idea of delivering or making available, making easily accessible those foods that are most culturally appropriate for every background that we see in this country. So how do you deal with those issues and those questions?
Yeah, so I think, if you look globally, there are a lot of different cultures that have included dairy in their foods. And fermented dairy is actually kind of very popular outside of the United States. So you might see lassis in India or amasi in South Africa. So I think there's ways to look at how fermented dairy. Also in the United States, dairy has been a staple food for a long time. So a lot of cultures have learned how to adapt it into their food, but I can tell you some ways here at the Dairy Council of California that we're kind of promoting that equity component and how it can fit in different cultural foods by actually working directly with communities themselves, because communities know their needs and know what they want and what they like. So we have a couple ways that we're doing that here at the Dairy Council. So we do provide these Let's Eat Healthy grant programs, where we fund diverse projects, maybe in schools and different communities that really show the local value for dairy foods. By providing funding to these organizations, they might be working on projects to provide more access or reduce waste of dairy products through, on-site food pantries. They might be working with students to develop culturally responsive recipes, or they might also be doing some agriculture literacy or really taking them to on farm to learn more about where their milk is coming from. So I think those are efforts to really have communities have a voice in, what's important to them and what they consume. We also are co-funding a larger study with that will look at dairy products within the WIC program to really add on more diverse products.
Tell people what the WIC program is.
Oh, yeah. The WIC program is the Women, Infants, and Children program. It's a supplemental nutrition program funded through the United States Department of Agriculture and implemented here through the California Department of Public Health. And it serves pregnant moms, breastfeeding moms, and families with children up to the age of 5. And they do provide a healthy food package. It actually just got updated recently this year. That provides, allotments of dairy foods, fruits and vegetables, whole grains, and a few other items. But it is a limited profile, so it does have yogurt, but it doesn't have a lot of the other fermented dairy products in that profile. So one of the goals of this study is to look at what do moms want to see? What other products would moms like to see in that WIC food package program that might not already be offering that are dairy, that might be more culturally appropriate or accepted within their households? So we're just getting started on that with kind of a survey, but we will do a demonstration project where we actually offer moms that, see what they choose, and also what type of health impacts that might have on them and their families. And then one other project that's similar, it's outside of WIC, but we do have a First 1,000 Days Dairy Initiative, and this is funded through the Legacy Health Endowment in the Central Valley at Stanislaus and Merced County, and it is focusing on helping families with children between 6 months and 2 years of age. And we're offering monthly funds to purchase nutrient-dense milk and dairy products. And we use a higher income threshold. We use about a 400 federal poverty level guideline, as opposed to a lot of the federal programs that cut it off around 185 to 200% federal poverty level, because we've seen in other studies that these families that are kind of the working poor, they still have trouble making ends meet. So this program primarily targets Latino families, and moms, again, get to choose a wide variety of products for cheeses, milks, yogurts, kefirs, other projects on that list that actually they can start introducing to their babies and young children between 6 months and 2 years of age. And we're hearing really positive feedback from those moms. And one quote that we received was, "This program has been a lifesaver for my family. The nutrition, education, and dairy offers have made a big difference in my children's health and my ability to feed my family." So I think the results of that program will also show what products are families valuing within the dairy category, even though they're diverse families and they still are consuming dairy.
So you and I have a history of talking about nutrition, and I remember talking about mother's milk and the importance of mother's milk, like children needing mother's milk, like how much healthier it is for their gut, for their immune systems, all that. Mm-hmm. So you see no conflict at 6 months moving off mother's milk and going on to cow's milk?
Oh, I should clarify that. So at 6 months, we're only introducing cheese and yogurt, 6 months to 1 year. So we do still promote, we still are aligned with promoting breast milk in year 1, but actually a lot of families don't know as young as 6 months, you can start introducing yogurt and cheese as first foods. And it's unsweetened, so it's also really adapting those taste buds to just that plain yogurt. You can mix it with fruit. So no, cow's milk is not recommended until age 1. So we stick with those global recommendations, but there are opportunities to offer other dairy products in that first year of life, just to, yes. So thanks for
And
asking that question.
Yeah. And then the other thing that I'm curious about is this whole battle over flavored milks, chocolate milk, fruit milks, orange milk, whatever, loaded with sugar often, and huge challenge. Kids love it. So mothers want their kids to be happy. So there's these battles going on between those who really are concerned about the nutritional benefits for our children at early age and the habits and what our metabolisms get addicted to. So can you talk about that challenge?
Yeah, and I will say the recommendations are for, under 5, really providing these products unsweetened. That being said, sometimes, sweetening products is a better way for consumption. I would like to take this time to say for flavored milk in schools, because that's often comes up, our processors here in California have really met that challenge. So if you look on those flavored milk in schools, they only have about 7 to 8 grams of added sugar. There's been a lot of reformulation to really bring those added sugar down to kind of be responsive to public health and moms, but yet still having that flavor that kids want, even with a lower added sugar amount. So I think there's been a lot of work done in reformulation to make those products that do have added sugar be even healthier. And also, I think there's opportunities to continue to look at reformulation. In the new rule that came out for school nutrition, they're actually asking to lower added sugar in yogurt. So there are opportunities to look at reformulation where the product is still highly acceptable by children and it makes parents more comfortable. But I would say if you're looking at your overall diet across the entire day, there is a limit in added sugar. But if you're adding sugar to, say, yogurt or oatmeal, that's a lot better than if you're eating, a cake or a candy bar. So I think it's really about balanced nutrition across your entire day or your entire week. And there's opportunities to include all foods in a healthy, well-balanced diet.
So that was a good discussion. I think we really covered this idea of sustainable nutrition, this idea of how you balance the utilization of milk as a product category in our healthy diets. It'll be interesting to watch over the next few years, that kind of ongoing debates and how both the industry responds, regulators respond, and the public responds. And so we'll be paying close attention to that as we move forward. And now I kind of want to switch to the environmental aspect and your thoughts about that, Cody. So California dairy has been in the past, criticized a lot for different impacts, but I know that our state, the dairy industry has been really trying to make the changes that meet both public demand, but also the desire of producers to keep their land healthy, their water supplies healthy, and all that. So why don't you talk about the practices that you see emerging, that you use on your farm?
Yeah, absolutely. That is something that California dairy has been criticized for. And I think it is one of those things that is probably the best story that California dairy farmers have to tell. And we are not always the best at telling our own stories, regardless of the size of a dairy, whether it's a 100-cow organic dairy like ours, or, a confined animal feeding operation milking 1,500 cows. There's really a suite of opportunities and practices that dairy farmers throughout California are using to rise up and meet the climate challenge and crisis that we're all facing, whether that is something like upcycling food waste. A lot of dairies utilize orange pulp, almond hulls, bakery byproduct, brewer's waste that would end up in a landfill, but instead they are using that as part of their feed ration, upcycling that food waste that would end up in a landfill, contributing to greenhouse gases, instead is being diverted through the rumen of cows and becoming an usable, nutrient-dense protein source. That's one amazing thing that we're seeing. There's the reduction in water utilization, both through irrigation processes as well as just recycling water on farms. If you looked at our dairy specifically, we utilize the water that comes into our milk barn 4 times before it ends up on the field as fertilizer. So we're recycling that water not only to cool milk, we're utilizing it to wash in the barn. It's being cycled multiple times before it ultimately ends up being used to fertilize our pastures and grow the feed that our cows will eat and then use to produce milk. There's also been a lot of increase in the efficiency of our cows. And sometimes people might view that as a negative, right? We're making these cows more efficient. But even on a farm like ours,
what that means is producing more milk per cow, right? Yeah.
More milk per cow on the same amount of water and feed. So these cows are actually getting more utilization out of what they're digesting and what they're taking in, and they're producing more milk. And that's just done through improvements in animal health, housing systems, genetics. We've gotten to a point where we understand the cow so much better and what she needs. So we're able to give her what she needs to produce more with less and do that in a healthy, sustainable system. Our cows now on our farm are producing 50% more than they would have been producing when my great grandfather was milking, consuming, ostensibly the same amount of feed, but doing it in the same housing environments on the same pasture. But we've genetically selected them to be more productive, and we've been able to improve their nutrition through advances in agricultural technologies. And the really cool thing with a farm like ours that's 100 years old is that we have the milk testing records to actually go back and look over that time frame of how that has changed over time and through the generations, not just of our cows, but of the farmers themselves. And I think the big thing that we talk a lot about is greenhouse gas emissions, particularly methane. And California is on track to meet, we're really leading the world in this area. We're on track to meet a 40% reduction by 2030 of our 1990 manure methane emissions. And California farmers have implemented a wide variety of practices to do that, whether it's been methane digesters to farms using the alternative manure management program, creating manure systems that no longer provide anaerobic environments for those methogens to produce methane. So going to dry stack, using that to make compost that then goes into our organic crop production systems that California is known for. Putting cows on pasture, more days on pasture, changing housing systems to composting pack barns that once again are producing compost that goes into our crop production system. And then when we look at like a farm like ours that's grazing 365 days a year, we're really embracing the regenerative movement. We're looking at soil health. We're testing our soil health, and we're really aiming for carbon sequestration. We're aiming to pull carbon from the atmosphere, lock it up in the soil, and we're holding it there in the soil by not farming that land. And so, we've created several hundred acres of permanent pasture that are just serving a purpose of a carbon sink while then producing grass-fed beef and organic dairy products.
We hope you're enjoying the conversation. If you are, please rate our podcast and offer a review. Your voice will help us grow our listener base, which helps us sustain the funding to share these conversations with the people and organizations shaping a more just and regenerative future. A future in which the food and farm businesses are helping to solve the largest challenges of our time.
One of the challenges that I hear about in the dairy industry or around agricultural sustainability in dairy is this challenge over how often animals need to be put inside of cover when it's really wet versus environments where it's a lot drier, where cows are on the field more often. What's your experience? Because you're in a wet zone. I mean, you guys are up on the Humboldt coast. It's very, very wet up there. So how do you deal with that challenge?
Yeah, so we're actually even wetter than the Mendocino coast. We can expect 60 to 100 inches of rain on our farm a year. So it is very wet. In our farming system, our cows are actually on pasture a full 365 days a year. So we are not housing them during the raining season. Some farms opt to do that. A lot of it has to do with the kind of setting that you're in, your environment particularly. We have soils that drain very well. They don't become muddy. We don't have surface water. So there is no streams running through our farm where we have concerns of runoff. If we had concerns of runoff, that would limit where our cattle could be, because now we're looking at, polluting waterways. If we have animals that are, turning up the ground, but that's not a system that we have to work around, right? So it's all a matter of your particular environment, and every farm addresses that differently and has to, do what works for their environment and within their regulatory framework. One thing that I think maybe we've seen is that, in Oregon and Washington, there was a big regulatory push to get cows out of the fields in winter. from a water quality standpoint, regardless of if there maybe was streams that we were concerned about. And so we put them in, and then we had concentrated manure. And now we're concerned about that GHG emissions from methane. And there's this shift towards, well, now we need to talk about getting those cows back onto pasture in these systems that we pushed them into barns because we didn't want them out there during winter. But now we're looking at maybe that wasn't the thing that we needed to worry about the most. And so we're kind of shifting our farming systems and having these conversations about how we have to change regulations in states that were pushing to confine animals during certain points of the year. And now they're like thinking maybe that wasn't the best system environmentally. And how are we going to actually change those frameworks when farms have built all this infrastructure because that's what the regulation pushed them towards. So luckily in California, that's not something we faced.
Well, I was going to say that this is a really good example of the complexity and the challenge, because science is continually evolving as the environment is changing. So it's like a catch up often. I know that I live in Sonoma County, as you know, and down in Marin, where they do have water quality challenges because they're on the basically land that's slowly draining into water bodies. And so they are under pressure to put their animals inside during certain times of the year. Yet a lot of animal rights people are pushing them not to do that. So it's a very interesting set of challenges that farmers have to deal with in this world where we have so many complex things going on and the environment's changing all around us. So that gets me to my final question for you around these particular issues. Like, what is the biggest challenges that you're faced? What do you see as the biggest challenge, not just for you, but for dairy overall in the state of California?
Well, I would say probably one of the, I think there's two major competing challenges. The first is just remaining fiscally sustainable. The markets are always fluctuating, it's volatile. And so you're always looking at how does a farm stay financially sustainable going forward? Because we can do all these amazing environmental practices, but if the farm isn't financially sustainable, it won't be there the next year to do those practices again. And so that's something we have to compete with. The other part of that, though, is that, like we were talking about, the environment is always changing, regulation is always changing. And so one of the biggest challenges for farms just in their everyday operations is how do we adjust constantly to these changes that are coming our way, whether it's the environment, the weather, what regulation maybe is presented now, but then as we've seen in other states, it's probably going to shift in a couple of years because science catches up and maybe things have changed. And so we're kind of looking at how all of this plays together and then ultimately impacts that financial decision that we have to make if we invest heavily in one area, but then in 10 years, maybe that's no longer relevant. We still have to, make that work. And so I think that's one of those challenges for farming is just like, it's never static. It's always changing and evolving.
Yeah, that's interesting. Here's a question that just occurs to me as we're talking. You have what I would call a small, diversified, really oriented towards direct market relationships. I know you ship milk to Rumiano and others, and you have cheeses are made from it, other things are made from it, you have ice cream, so you add value. But your farm is not the typical dairy in California. California, as was pointed out, dairy is number one. It's huge. We're the number one dairy state. We're beyond Wisconsin, right? I mean, it's incredible how much dairy is produced here in this state. Big dairies are very different from your dairy. Do you ever find that you guys come into conflict? Like the big dairies want something to happen because it will serve them in meeting all these myriad challenges versus what you have to face. Are there tensions that you guys have to work out?
I don't really feel like we ever run into tensions because milk functions the way it does within the market. I don't feel from the farmer side that we're ever really in conflict with big dairies. The tensions generally come from how things are implemented. So sometimes new regulation comes or legislation pops up that maybe doesn't serve both sides because we're ultimately all dairy farmers. We're producing the same product. We might be marketing it different. We might send it into different, streams or be doing more direct market opposed to, sending it into a co-op. But a lot of times the challenge comes when we see something that comes in that maybe is targeted towards large dairies, or particularly even not even so much the difference between large and small, but regional. It's, the target
Dry
of it is
environment versus
towards
wet.
Central Valley.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, Central Valley versus Humboldt County. And suddenly we end up needing to comply with something that really just doesn't impact us. That at the end of the day, our environment is not something that even is conducive to that, or that when we look at these new rules, things that we have, it is not something that is going to be reasonable for us to try to work within, because just environmentally, it doesn't fit our region. And so a lot of times that's where, as farmers, we have to work to, make sure that the frameworks recognize that California is a huge state and is very much climate and environmentally different from top to bottom and from, east to west. It's what applies here does not apply just over the pass in Redding. And so that's where I find the most conflict comes, is not from farmer to farmer, but within how we make things work from throughout this really diverse state. If we're in Wisconsin, Wisconsin's not as big and not as diverse as California. It's a lot easier for everyone to kind of work the same way.
Yeah. Well, it reminds me of when you described your farm, your topography, geography, the soil types on your farm. I mean, your ancestors picked a very good place for dairy, just because of the way you described the fact that there's not water running through it, and that you have these soils that are really very good at draining. That gives you a super advantage compared to some other farms or dairies that I've seen, or who are in much more challenging environments for actually practicing dairy farming. And one of the things that I wonder over time is there going to be, because of the pressures, either climate pressures or other kinds of pressures, development, if that's going to sort out, where we're going to get back to the dairies that continue to thrive are going to be those dairies where there were really good decisions made, or luck around where you ended up?
I'm not sure about that, to be honest. I think for the kind of system that we have, where we are an organic dairy that's pasture-based, like Humboldt County, it really makes sense from grazing, because we can produce pasture 365 days a year. But on the other hand, bringing things in like feed or bedding is incredibly expensive because of how remote Humboldt County is. And by comparison, our friends that farm in Tulare, I wish I could buy the feedstuffs that they can get down there, but it's just unreasonable for me to have access to some of the things that they have access to. And they then have the benefit, they have methane digesters, they're, producing renewable energy. They are able to capitalize on, selling their compost that they produce into the organic crop production systems. And that's not something that is reasonable for me to achieve. We were looking at the Healthy Soils program and the idea of composting on our fields here, and just the cost of bringing in outside compost was cost prohibitive because of how remote Humboldt is. So we're really limited to what we can produce on farm, which then limits our ability to take advantage of some of those state programs that incentivize those sort of soil health programs that we practice already, and it would be really amazing if we could utilize them. But because of how remote Humboldt is, we don't have that option. So I think in a lot of ways, it kind of balances out that we have certain advantages in the climate we're in and how we farm here, specific to us. But then there are other advantages to other parts of the state that I don't get to capitalize on.
Yeah, very interesting. Appreciate that nuanced, that description of the nuances that are so important for the viability and the ability for farms to adapt and survive and thrive. And it seems like you guys are thriving from what I've seen, and I'm really glad to know that. So we're getting close to the end here. So I just wanted to kind of turn the page here and get to some of the closing questions, if that's cool with you guys. Why don't you talk about the future? What are you most excited about? And Amy, you want to begin?
Sure. So I think, from that kind of nutrition aspect and side, we're really excited about elevating dairy as part of this food as medicine movement. You see a lot of that happening, a lot of opportunities there to work with healthcare and to work on prevention, and to just have dairy as part of those conversations, and creating opportunity for dairy to be part of those food as medicine programs, as well as, getting that into preventing disease and other factors, improving quality of life for Californians.
So going back to what we talked about and the challenges that those people who are challenging the overall nutrient health of dairy, I mean, what I'm hearing from you is that you feel very confident that you're going to be able to clear away either misconceptions or poor science, or you're going to be able to address those things that may be legitimate concerns.
Yeah, I think there's enough variety within the dairy category to meet needs of diverse populations, and I think there's a lot of research showing the health benefits. Additionally, the FDA just recently created a health claim for yogurt, which basically shows that if you regularly consume yogurt as part of your healthy diet, it has a reduction in type 2 diabetes. So I think the research is coming out. We're seeing more and more benefits of including dairy as part of diet. So I do think there's opportunities there to kind of counter that argument. And as more and more research comes up, to continue to translate that science into consumers of why it's important to include dairy in your diet.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we live in this really polarized culture. So sometimes people, you can share with them ideas and they won't believe it because, first of all, people don't trust government at all, it seems to me. I mean, it doesn't matter what side of the political spectrum on. I mean, if you're a conservative person, you don't like the regulations, you don't like them telling you what you do, let me eat anything I want. And then on the other side, you have the more liberal kind of people saying, well, the science is saying it's good. I don't trust the science because corporations control the science. I mean, it's a real mess. And do you actually feel like that's going to get resolved? Do you see hope at the end of the rainbow?
That's really a hard one, Michael, because I feel like we continue to see this concept of polarization continuing to be a strong narrative within our country overall. But I will say TikTok has been this really stabilizing place where we see these influencers promoting specifically cottage cheese, Greek yogurt, and we actually see that translate into increased sales across the country. So it's kind of interesting that it's kind of from the ground up, people kind of started this cottage cheese craze, and you kind of see the benefits. So I don't know where we're going to land overall, as a nation. And I think good science is good science. If the government wants to fund more nutrition science, if they wanted to be more unbiased, I would say the industry does fund dairy research, but we're funding institutions, and it's science that is not out there that the government is not funding. So we need this research to be done. So we need more funding going to it from government if people don't want to, or from, I don't know where people want the research to come from, because like what you said, some people don't trust government, some people don't trust industry. When you get enough research that continuously to say the same thing, you're really seeing that, yes, this is a good product and yes, it has benefits.
Okay. Cody, what are your thoughts about the future that way?
I think for me, the thing I'm most excited about is the opportunity for dairy farmers in California to be part of the climate solution, to not only be the ones rising up to meet this, but also to tell that story so that the consumer feels comfortable. They feel good about consuming dairy products from an environmental standpoint, that they recognize all of these practices that dairy farmers are doing to be part of the solution, and to provide them not just a nutritious, safe product, but a product that's environmentally friendly. And I think a lot of that comes back to dairy farmers being able to tell those stories, to share what they're doing and to make that known, because we don't always see that. We very often don't see that. And the part that I get really excited about is how that then translates down to revitalizing a lot of these rural small communities. Because when the dairy communities are thriving, there's access in those communities, but it also brings business back to them. And so you're able to see these small communities that are struggling really starting to prop themselves back up and to rebuild themselves and see business coming back to their main streets. And that's a story that is incredible, and that to us, we get really excited about and really passionate about.
Yeah, I applaud that point. One of the great tragedies of the last 70 years in this country is the degradation of rural communities because of basically the industrialization of agriculture, the destruction of kind of the exploitation of the way we approach things. I do see the pendulum swinging back the other way. People are realizing the cost of of destroying smaller operations, and we need a diversity of sizes of operations. And so it's really nice to hear you say that, because I do agree, as we do better by supporting the diversity of scales of agricultural operations, doesn't matter what the commodity is, what the crop is, what the product is. We have to have this diversity of scale because they all kind of fit different environments at different times, and they all contribute to their regional economic life. So yeah, I'm happy to hear you say that, and I totally believe that. And Root to Change is all about trying to support that re-diversification of scales in our agricultural system. So this kind of gets us to the last question I have for you, which is really about policy, and it kind of goes back to something that Amy said. The USDA and the federal government and the state government do invest in research, but in my mind, it's way too little. And it forced the corporations to become the funders in a certain way. They needed more. And with that, there are examples of corporations manipulating research. It does happen, but that is the cost of taking it away from the public sector. So I'm just curious, not just about research, but when you think about policy, what is it that policymakers need to better understand about the dairy industry in California, or about agriculture in general, or food and nutrition in general? Cody, why don't you go first?
I think the thing for me that helps policymakers make better decisions is boots on the ground. So it's not just about hearing about the dairy industry or agriculture in general, but it's actually getting policymakers onto farms. Because when you actually experience agriculture, and experience it at all levels of agriculture, from a small farm like ours to a larger farm, your perceptions change because you actually see it, right? There's nothing like actually seeing what's happening than to understand it. And that helps them make more informed decisions around what's needed in agriculture, and talking to farmers and having open dialogues, and farmers being willing to do that and have open dialogues with policymakers, share their needs, their concerns. I think that really does help inform policy that works, that leads to a resilient agricultural and food system, and leads to ultimate sustainability on all levels. I want to say, though, that I do think California is really unique in the world, in that we take a carrot rather than a stick approach to a lot of our greenhouse gas policies, in that they offer the incentives and incentivize the practices that we're looking for, rather than trying to push regulation that requires farms to conform. And that has had really positive effects. We are seeing California rising up to meet this 40% reduction in greenhouse or manure methane emissions, because we offered the incentives that help farmers do it. Farmers want to do all these great things. Farmers care about the environment.